literacy, and that is what we call it in our early childhood programs. Because literacy is more than just reading. It's a really broad package. Unfortunately, it's not quite as simple as ABC, so what does it take to have literacy development? And as I was thinking about this and how to kind of race through it in the time we have, I decided to take the approach that we use. We try and often be multi-sensory, incorporate more than one sense when we're working with children. So we think of an auditory component, a visual component, a kinesthetic component. So that's what I thought, okay, those are all parts of literacy. Interestingly, when we think of like, oh, go look at a book, let's learn the letters, we tend to think visually, but really the biggest chunk of my notes is auditory. And that really is true, that auditory kind of piece is the foundation. It's also, we know now with a lot of good neuroscience, the source of probably the greatest number of difficulties or issues that come up are linked to that auditory piece, because language was first spoken. The idea that we write it down and use that to communicate is a newer thing, and our brain just is not naturally wired that way. It takes more adaptations to get there. So, auditory. The first thing is language. Children need language, and they need a lot of it. And it takes many exposures to acquire words in lots of different ways. So you need experiences of the word here in a different context, here, so that all those overlapping things form a web, and the richer that web, the more easy it is to pull it up, to use it, to know what it is. So what can you do? Talk with your children. It sounds so simple. But we have noticed over the last 40 years, just changes culturally. It's not a condemnation, not bad, but a lot of things that have meant that children have less exposure to modeled conversation. They're not kind of eavesdropping as much. We've created lots of opportunities that are good, appropriate children's options while adults are over here doing their thing. So they're not hearing some of that. We went to cell phones first, which tended to be more clipped conversations. Now they don't even hear us necessarily talking to someone because they hear us pressing buttons to send a text. So we actually have to be a little bit conscious about teaching them the art of conversation and dialogue with some listening skills, which needs practice, and also kind of asking good questions. How do you answer questions? Not just the questions about where did you leave your sock. Those are important questions too, but also kind of more open-ended questions, or questions that would invite someone to have a different kind of response. So talk with them. Children need, again, repeated exposure to lots of different kinds of words, and help sometimes understanding that words have multiple meanings. Why is it that a bug is an insect? It's a germ. It's a thing that gets in my computer. My little brother is bugging me. Those are all different nuances of the same three letters. Language is so important because it's foundational for thought. Think of that little voice in your head that's talking to you. Sometimes it's telling you things that are about social emotional things. Sometimes it's just sort of planning out what you're going to do next. That piece is really important, and language is a part of how we think and process, not just in kind of language arts and literacy sort of realms, but math, social emotional, science, everything requires that language component. There's a book that's received a lot of press within, especially the last month. It's been out for about, I think, closer to 6 months. 30 million words. Dana Susskind, who's a researcher out of Chicago, wrote it. But the subtitle is Building Your Child's Brain. And again, she's making that case for the importance of language and its transfer to all the realms of thinking and learning. So things to do: have conversations, model listening, ask open-ended questions, as well as those that may require a child to sequence events. What did we do? What was the first thing? What came next? And some kind of recall. Do you remember what happened then? Notice multiple meanings, notice expressions. expressions. Sometimes there are fun things. I used to have a set of cards that were animal-based questions. This year we played around. This is really for slightly older kids. I just picked it up at a bookstore. The Kids' Book of Questions. Again, it's designed also to help them start to think of questions they could ask each other at the lunch table. So recently we started off our day with, if you could make your parents try any one food, what would it be? Do you think kids should be forced to try new foods? So there are ways to start kind of thinking and using language. The next kind of auditory component of literacy is phonological or phonemic awareness. And phonological is broad, all kinds of sound awareness. When we get to a phoneme, that's the smallest division of speech, spoken speech sound. So we're moving from the big to the small. And in kindergarten, we really are getting to that level of phonemic awareness. It starts with rhyme, because rhyme has rhythm, it has patterns, our brain likes and responds favorably to those sorts of things. Then kids have to develop kind of a sense of words. You think they know words, but they hear words strung together. So we have to actually sometimes make them aware that these things are separate words. That sentence has 4 words in it. We play games about that. How many words do you hear? What did I say? Then we move down to syllables. So we're taking larger words and breaking them into smaller chunks. Then they become initial sounds, the first sound you hear in a word, so that alliteration idea. Mary Mouse makes marshmallows. Boy, what's the same about all of us? They all start with mm. The next thing we naturally tend to hear, and you'll notice it in written work your children bring home, is the final sound of a word. That's easy for our brain to grab onto. So you might get a page written where you see DG, and someone says that's dog. The last thing, the hardest thing kind of to hear and to work with is that medial sound or any kind of letters that are blended in the middle. So the vowels and things where you have like B and L together, or N is especially hard, like the word hand. That N hidden in there is really difficult. A lot of this work we do, and we say it's like games you could play in the dark, because we're still not at letter symbols yet. We can do all of this, get out to that. Children are then taking those individual kind of sounds as they become aware of that, and we're having them blend them together to form words, which will be the basis then for sounding words out. It's, I have a little turtle, and sometimes my turtle talks that way. His turtles move slowly. What's the secret word the turtle's given us? Oh, it's miss. At the same time, we're asking kids to break words apart. That's what they need for their writing. What are the sounds you hear in dog? Do. We help them elongate it and figure that out. And then the last thing, this might seem a little bit goofy.
Myra, may I say something? Just when you said that, we saw something recently in our learning support meeting.
The voice on.
The slide.
The slide, yes. When we ask children to blend sounds, we say, keep your voice on. Sometimes we do some kinesthetic sorts of things to help pull those sounds together. Because if you're hearing really 3 very disparate sounds, that's a huge leap for your brain to be putting at. But if it's at, then it's smoother. We also, along with that, say don't add extra sounds. And this one I've noticed a little bit with some poorly done computerized voices. I think Siri's pretty good. But to articulate consonants, there's often an extra sort of a vowel sound. So you get B programs that say like B says buh. B really just says buh, which I can hardly make go across the room. But if you have that B says buh, well now kids are hearing kind of 2 sounds, and suddenly a 4-letter word has become like a 6-letter word because they're hearing sort of this extra stuff in there. So those are pieces. The last kind of wacky little bit is that we do a lot of things about switching phonemes around. And you're thinking, why would I need to do that? So we play games like say goat, say it again instead of g, say moat. What we're doing is we're developing patterns. The brain likes patterns again, and kids are starting to notice commonalities and patterns, and you think flexibly about those sounds and words. So we're doing things like that. So what can you do? Rhyme, that's an easy one. Play with words, alliteration, could we have a whole meal where everything starts with B? Let's see, what would we eat? You can practice kind of using turtle talk. Go get your ox. Or asking them to do that. Kids, asking your child to be the teacher is a wonderful thing, because if they can model and kind of teach you, then we know that they understand and they're practicing those skills themselves. And at this point, we need a little brain break ourselves. So we'll just practice a little bit. I grabbed some words I'm going to use later today. We start at kind of the syllable level. Say, and I often start with a compound word because that's really simple. Say gumdrop. Say it again and don't say gum. So you see where we're going. Then you take it away from the compound word, it gets a little harder. Say goblin. Say it again and don't say then. And we would continue, get to some 3-syllable words, and those get sort of tricky because depending on if there's especially when there's a vowel in kind of one of those middle syllables, say gravity. Say it again and don't say grab. And that is really, to keep that it in there is really hard for the students. They lose a syllable. And we will use visual things, not letters still necessarily, but they'll notice. I said, wait, we started with, these 3 things, but you just took 2 of them away, and I only said you only took the red block away or whatever. So, say gold. Say it again, don't say good. Oh, isn't that funny? That word old is hiding inside of gold, and we make a joke out of it. And, notice some things like that, words. We swap sounds as we did with goat and boat. And we might get up and actually need to move, which I will not put you on the spot, but you're always welcome. I always tell students, you don't have to sit for the most part. If you need to stand, you can stand, and we model how to do that and be respectful and not wandering around the room. But yeah, if you need to move, you can move. So we might jump if you hear the target sound in the word or something like that to listen for kind of those initial and final sounds. The last little bit of auditory piece would be kind of that alphabetic principle, that letters stand for sounds. Now we're starting to get towards letters. And a letter stands for a sound, more or less. There are 40-some speech sounds in English and only 26 letters, so you see the problem. But before we can even get to that, we need to get to the fact that LMNO is not a letter. Sorry. So that song, we have to slow down some of that. That's, learn the song, be able to see the letters in other ways. And then also the names of the letters are misleading. We do need the names. They are important. There are some branches and places in the world where they tend to approach reading from the sounds first and not so much from the names. It can be done. It's a little challenging when we get to things like the fact that you just have to spell T-H-E for the. Because if you don't have a name for it, how do I tell you to spell T-H-E? Because it's not T. So we do both. But the names are misleading. C makes you think that C is going to make that soft sound like in ice most of the time, but most of the time it says k, as in cookie. And then there are letters like F, where the first sound it says is that's a vowel sound, is really the letter, or the sound, the phoneme that the letter F represents. So we have to kind of get around all those things. But now we're at letters so we can be visual. And we've got mixed fonts. We get those T's with the tail on them, and kids think they're J's, and the A, that crazy A that looks like an upside down G. We have uppercase, we have lowercase. We just have to deal with it. Kids have to be exposed to all of it. They need to recognize at some level all of those things and work through them and experience them and notice them. We have some words in kindergarten we call brain words. You might have had sight words as a student, and the subtle difference is that we call them brain words because these words are words your brain needs to know really quickly. We see them so often, we use them so much. Some of them are non-phonetic, so we can't sound them out. So your brain has to know them. Some of them might be phonetic, but again, we see them so much, we don't want to be going E every time we see the word me. You only have so much capacity. And part of the reason your brain likes patterns and connections like that is that they are ways to chunk information and store it and retrieve it more quickly. So that's the next sort of thing that's starting to happen with literacy, is that we're finding these chunks and these common pieces for retrieval, and brain words is one of those things. Some of those words we'll see in other places, and just to see them quickly as a chunk and recognize that chunk is in the long run going to be more important. However, you only have so much capacity, so if you're like visually trying to recognize every word you read, you are going to run out of storage space and limit your reading ability. Somewhere around that 4th or 5th grade level, things will come crashing down. So that's why we want them to be doing that decoding and sounding out and things like that, because when we get to large multi-syllable words that we need for technical fields, you need a blend of the two to recognize pieces within that word as quick chunks and to decode and put those things together, as well as to visually recognize.